She believed her twin was lost in the war, but a human had saved her life. The twin flames there over the ruins of Verithar Ridge had not known song in years. Where once a palace had stood, its towers reaching into the violet clouds like spears of light, now only shattered pillars and ash-covered stone remained. The wind carried silence between broken arches and melted banners, whispering through corridors where laughter had once echoed, twin voices in harmony, as inseparable in pitch as they had been in spirit. Now only one remained. Queen Varel moved through the ruins as one walks through a graveyard that has never been blessed. Her ceremonial robes torn by brambles, dust thick in her silver hair. She had dismissed her guards miles before. No one was allowed here, not even the stars bore witness to this yearly pilgrimage, for she made it in secret, shrouded from satellites and censors, from nobles and priests, from ministers and mourners. This ground, where the final blast of the war had torn the atmosphere apart, was sacred not because of what it contained, but because of what it had taken. Her sister's body had never been found. Only a sliver of her ceremonial cloak, stitched with the sigils of House Valen and laced with the thread of flame silk they had both worn during the war councils, was recovered, burned nearly to ash. Blue blood had stained the edges, alien and familiar. That was all. No remains, no voice left screaming through the calm channels, just a silent field, scorched and abandoned, where one half of her soul had been torn away without warning. Varel reached the edge of the ridge and stopped, her boots sinking slightly into the dust. Before her stood a simple obsidian marker, embedded into the ground by her own hands the day after the ceasefire. No name was carved into it, only a single etched flame, unfinished, imperfect, missing one side of its mirrored arc. It was the emblem they had shared since birth, before titles and thrones, before war and duty, when they had simply been two sisters curled beneath moonlight in their father's garden, dreaming of flight. She dropped to her knees beside it, not in elegance, but in collapse. A queen made from fire and steel, folded now into the shape of a girl who had lost her anchor. Saria, she said aloud for the first time in a long time. The name tore from her throat, thick with grief, thick with guilt. I promised I would protect you. I promised they wouldn't take you from me. The wind answered with nothing. Varel reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny crystal shard, opaline, pale, and broken at the tip. It had been part of their soul bond pendant, gifted to them at the time of joining, meant to resonate whenever the other was near. It hadn't lit up in years. She still carried it. She placed it at the base of the marker and closed her eyes. You should be here, she whispered, mocking my speeches, challenging the elders, teaching me how to smile again. She touched the flame, etching with her fingers, and felt the cold bite into her skin. I don't know how to rule without you. She did not cry. The tears had come in the early years, when her sister's voice still echoed in dreams and her laughter lingered behind every door. But now her grief had calcified, buried under statecraft and warfare, beneath alliances and obligations. She ruled for both of them, but she lived for only one, and in the dusk, when the twin moons rose above the scorched skyline and cast shadows across the empty field, Queen Varel sat at the grave of a sister whose light had once shaped galaxies, and whispered promises into the dirt she could no longer keep. Sergeant Elias Kale had stopped believing in gods long before the war ended, but when he found her half buried under the skeletal remains of a fallen war spire, her breathing ragged, her limbs twisted and blackened by plasma fire, he didn't need faith to understand what he was looking at. He didn't know her name, didn't recognize the etched crest on her chest plate, obscured by soot and blood. He only knew that she was alive when she should not be. The battlefield was a graveyard. No one came back for the wounded, no extractions, no mercy. Terran and Varillian alike were left where they fell. One more price of galactic war, too fragile to allow compassion. But Elias had never been good at obedience. He dropped to one knee and checked her pulse. It was faint, chaotic, flickering like a failing engine. Her skin was slick with blood, but her eyes, when they snapped open, blazed with an amber fire that made him pause. Not fear, not confusion, fury, even dying. She looked at him like she might rip out his throat if she had the strength. He leaned in. Easy, he whispered. I'm not here to finish what the war started. She tried to speak, but only coughed, a spatter of blue blood hitting the stone. Her hand moved instinctively toward the dagger at her hip, its blade shattered, but she couldn't lift it. Her body trembled. I'm going to lift you, Elias said carefully, removing his outer jacket. Scream if you want, but I'm getting you out of here." She didn't scream. She passed out. He carried her through the wreckage, dodging patrol drones and navigating the ghost signal corridors of the dead zone. His evac team had already gone. He set no transmission, left no trail. The war had taken enough from both sides. He refused to let it take her too. They hid in the belly of a shattered cargo hauler for 3 days while he stabilized her field med packs, bone welders, scavenged rations. She slipped in and out of consciousness, speaking in fragments, half words in an alien tongue, cries for someone named Varel. Each time, Elias held her hand until the fever broke, until the trembling stopped. She never told him her name, so he gave her one, Celine. It wasn't hers, but she wore it like a skin to small, clinging to it while her memory burned away pieces of a self she couldn't grasp. She began to recover slowly. Her body healed with the stubbornness of someone who refused to surrender to death. She could stand after a week, walk after 2, speak after 3, and though she didn't remember who she was, the rage never left her eyes. "I was important," she said once, staring at the ship's cracked viewport, watching distant stars drift in silence. "I think I was someone they feared." Elias handed her a bowl of hot broth. "You still are." She smiled, then just barely. But each night, as she drifted into uneasy sleep, she would reach for the shard she wore around her neck, something he'd recovered from her armor, still faintly glowing, pulsing like it was searching for another piece of bond, a mirror, a twin. And though she didn't know what it meant yet, Elias did. Because whatever war had broken her, whatever hell had swallowed her name, she wasn't finished. The flames still burned, and it would not go out quietly. The days passed like vapor inside the freighter. One moment Celine was still, watching the stars shift across the viewport in silence. The next she was pacing, restless, stalking the narrow corridors like a caged predator. Her body had healed, but something within her remained cracked deeper than blood or bone, something Elias couldn't reach with medicine or tools. He saw it in the way her gaze would suddenly narrow at a passing reflection, or how she'd stop mid-sentence, caught in a thought she couldn't name. Memory didn't return all at once. It came in fragments, like ash caught in wind, unpredictable, choking. At first she was content to be nameless. Celine was a shelter, a name not stained with loss. Elias treated her not as a patient or a relic, but as a person. He taught her to reprogram the navigation console, to recalibrate the old heating coils, to laugh again awkwardly at first, like she'd forgotten how. He gave her space but never distance. He never asked what she remembered, unless she brought it up herself. She was grateful for that, even if she never said it aloud. But the dreams were becoming louder. They started as colors, violent, chaotic bursts of silver and flame. Then came voices, echoes, and languages she didn't understand until she did. One night she awoke screaming, drenched in sweat, clawing at the scar beneath her ribcage. Elias rushed in, weapon drawn, only to find her curled in a corner, whispering, "She called me her other breath." I was her other breath. She didn't know what it meant, not exactly, but the phrase clung to her like a chain. In the mess hall, she often stared at her reflection in the small reflective panel above the water basin, not out of vanity, but recognition, or the lack of it. Her face was familiar in the way a song is remembered after years of silence. She would trace the lines of her jaw, the sharp slant of her eyes, the faint blue veins beneath her skin. "This face used to wear something," she murmured once. "Responsibility. Fire." People bowed. Elias didn't flinch. "I can believe that. I don't know if I want to," she said. "If I was that important, why did no one come for me?" That silence never left her, even when she fixed systems, even when she trained in the cargo bay, practicing forms her body remembered though her mind didn't. Her hands moved with terrifying precision, strikes sharp as lightning, footwork balanced and royal. Elias watched in awe. "You weren't just a soldier," he told her. "You were something bigger." She laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Maybe I was a ghost even before the war tried to kill me." But the shift came with the shard. It had been hanging around her neck, unnoticed, until one day it began to pulse softly at first, an echo, a thrum. She didn't know what it was until she placed her hand against it and whispered, "Varel." The moment the name left her lips, a dozen memories surged like broken glass through her skull. 2 girls beneath a glowing canopy of trees, hands clasped during a storm, matching robes at a royal ceremony. One voice always singing just a breath. Behind her own twin laughter. And then fire, a battlefield, her hand reaching through smoke, Varel screaming her name across a collapsing ridge. Then silence. Celine crumpled to the floor, her breath shattered, eyes wide with horror. She remembered who she was and who she had left behind. Back on Veridai Prime, the throne had not changed, but the woman who sat on it had grown sharper, colder, more precise with every passing year. Queen Varel was still beautiful, still revered, still fierce in the eyes of the 5 systems her name ruled. But beneath her command sat a silence that had never left, not since the day she had stood among the ruins of Verithar Ridge and buried her sister without a body. The court never mentioned Seria. Her name was absent from ceremonies. Her portrait had been quietly removed from the Hall of Victory. But Varel remembered in everything. She remembered when she walked through the war gardens and smelled the red jossa vines her sister used to braid into her crown. She remembered when she read state dispatches aloud and paused at words Seria once mocked for their pomp. She remembered when she stood at the balcony during sunset and still turned, hoping to hear her twin's sarcastic voice beside her. The ministers called her wise. The galaxy called her just. But she was only surviving. Each treaty she signed, each system she brought under protection, each military reform she enacted, it was all done with Seria's ghost seated beside her, silent, watching. She wore her own grief like armor, seamless and without flaw. No one saw her cry. No one dared ask if she still mourned. Once a month, she visited the grave. She never spoke during those visits, never lit the ceremonial lanterns. She would simply stand beside the unmarked marker, the same one she had carved herself, and place her hand on it, not to say goodbye, but to say, "I'm still here." In the privacy of her chambers, she often turned the twin flame pendant in her fingers. Her half had long since dimmed, its crystal core inert. It had glowed brightly once, when Seria was alive. Their bond had been more than symbolic, it was genetic, woven through their breath and spirit. The pendant was meant to pulse when the other twin was near. But for years it had stayed dark, until 3 nights ago, she had awakened in the middle of the night to a low humming from her private vault. At first she thought it a malfunction, but when she opened the compartment and took the pendant in hand, it was glowing faintly, a single pulse, then another. Impossible. She ran a trace, cross-checked the bond. The frequencies were fragmented, scattered across systems. No one else could read it. The royal engineers assumed a data glitch, but Varel knew better. It was her. It was Saria.no. Part of Varel wanted to believe it, because to believe meant she had buried her alive. But the crystal did not lie. Their bond had been forged before birth. If it pulsed, then Seria's soul still burned. She did not call the council. She did not wake the fleet. She summoned the Ark in silence and told only her closest guard, "Prepare a course. Fringe sector. Coordinates embedded in this crystal. I go alone." And when the royal chamber doors sealed behind her, the stars that had wept with her for years began to watch again. The queen was leaving her throne not as ruler, but as sister. And the one she had mourned for a decade was about to be found. She didn't sleep the night it all returned. Celine sat hunched against the freighter's cold wall, the shard around her neck glowing softly, thrumming against her chest like a second heartbeat. Her fingers trembled as they traced its edges, sharp and worn. One side cracked where it had once been split by accident or by fate. She no longer needed to ask where it came from. She knew it had been part of a matching pair, once worn by 2 sisters who had not needed words to speak across distance. Her eyes were raw, her throat sore, but for the first time in years that didn't feel like hers. Her heart had a name. Seria. She whispered it aloud. Not Celine. Seria Varen Valen, General of House Valen, twin sister to Queen Varel, born under the Red Comet during the Eclipse Accord. That title had once been a burden. Now it was the only thing that kept her from falling apart. Elias sat nearby, quiet, just watching her breathe. She had screamed when it returned, memories not like dreams but like shrapnel, violent and jagged. He hadn't tried to stop it. He just waited until she stopped shaking, then handed her a cloth for her bloodied nose and said nothing. Now, in the silence of the ship's old mess room, she looked at him differently with knowing eyes. Not distant, not alien, but deeply aware. "You knew something was off," she said finally. "Didn't you?" He nodded. "From the first time you lifted a plasma tool like a dueling sword. I was raised in the flame court. I trained with live blades since I was 5. Explains a lot." She smiled, faint but real. Then her expression darkened. "I died, didn't I?" Elias leaned back in his seat. "No, you just disappeared. The rest of the galaxy decided that was the same thing. She stared at the shard again. My sister thinks I'm dead. Varel. Her voice cracked at the name. She begged me not to take the rear flank at Verithar. I did anyway. Saved your fleet doing it, almost got myself erased. She rose to her feet. I need to get home. Elias blinked. You think the moment you walk back in, the queen just hugs you and throws a feast? Saria turned slowly, and for the first time, the full authority of her lineage surged into her voice. No, but I am not a ghost, Elias. I am not a myth. I am a sister who left her other half to mourn alone. That ends now. He stood, jaw tense. Then I go with you. Saria didn't argue. They left the next morning, the freighter patched and loaded. Its destination plotted not by nav charts but by the shard's pulsing light, each beat a breadcrumb in the void, leading home. And far across the stars, already drawing closer in silent flight, another ship followed the same pull. The Ark had been built for silence. It cut through nebula fields and radiation scars like a ghost, leaving no trail, sending no broadcast. Its technology was beyond modern Terran sensors, older, smarter, wrapped in ancient codes laced with Virilian blooddies. Only one person in the galaxy had the authority to fly it. Queen Varel had not spoken since the ship left orbit. She stood alone in the observation chamber, eyes fixed on the distant shimmer where Starfield met signal. The crystal around her neck pulsed like a heartbeat, faint but steady, confirming what her mind refused to name. Her sister was alive, somewhere. Saria's flame had not only survived, it had grown strong enough to call her back. Varel hadn't told anyone. She knew what the council would say, that she was hallucinating grief, that the dead don't speak. But she remembered the bond they shared. Saria had never truly left her. It was only the world that had convinced her to let go. The signal grew stronger with each passing day, until the moment the Ark's AI picked up a ship idling near the edge of the fringe veil, a battered freighter, barely held together by repair foam and solar tape. Its comes silent, but its beacon unmistakable. Varel stared at the data in disbelief. The shard frequency matched. The power signature of her sister's pendant was undeniable, and there, standing at the outer airlock, was the silhouette of a woman whose movements mirrored her own, subtle, sharp, defiant. Varel reached for the hatch lever but froze as it began to open from the other side. There was no speech, no formality, no protocol, just breath and silence and the echo of footsteps crossing metal, slow and deliberate. Then Saria stepped into view. Her hair was shorter now, wild from travel. Her skin was rougher, hands calloused from work, not fit for royalty. But her eyes were unchanged, flame-touched and full of that same fire that Varel had once leaned on like air. Neither sister spoke. Varel reached forward and touched her arm, fingertips trembling. You're real. Saria nodded once, not trusting her voice. Then Varel pulled her in. No queen, no soldier, just two souls who had lived 10 lifetimes in each other's absence. The crystal pendant pulsed brightly between them. The twin flames reunited, and somewhere deep in the ship's system, without command, the Ark began transmitting one soft phrase across the galaxy. The air returns. There are moments in history when the universe holds its breath, not in the thunder of war nor in the rise of empires, but in quiet reunions too intimate for the stars to name. It happened on the Ark, not with an army, not with trumpets, but with the sound of one sister stepping into the presence of the other. And when Saria Varen crossed the chamber floor, her boots scraping the ancient metal with slow, steady resolve, Queen Varel stood still as marble, her hands clenched at her sides, her jaw locked like stone, cracking under years of silence. It wasn't the body that Varel recognized first, not the height, the voice, or even the shards of memory carried in the gate. It was the eyes, those flame-born eyes that had matched hers since before either of them had a name. For years, Varel had chased those eyes in dreams, only to awaken to empty halls and court chambers that echoed too loudly. Now they were here, looking back at her, alive. The pain should have spoken first, but it didn't. Neither did duty nor grief. Only breath. Saria reached out, as if unsure whether the sight before her was solid. I saw you, she said, every time. I closed my eyes, even when I couldn't remember my own name. Varel stepped forward so slowly it hurt. Her voice cracked like ancient stone. You should have died. I almost did. Then why didn't you? Saria laughed, raw and fragile. Because some stubborn Terran fool refused to leave me behind. Varel turned then, noticing the man in the doorway. Elias Kale stood quiet, straight-backed. more soldier than intruder. He didn't lower his eyes nor flinch beneath the weight of Varel's gaze. Instead, he offered a simple nod. "I don't know what you are," she said, "but you brought her home." He met her look with steady calm. "No, Majesty, she brought herself home. I just walked beside her until she remembered how." Varel almost smiled. Almost. She looked back to Saria, eyes welling with something deeper than tears, something forged across years of empty space and hollow mourning. "I made a grave for you," she whispered. "Every year I left a piece of myself there. You carried my voice into battle, and I buried it in stone when they told me you were gone." Saria closed the distance. Their foreheads met in the center of the chamber, hands clasping at the wrist as they'd done in training drills long ago. "Then dig it up," Saria said, "because I'm here now, and we are not done." They stood like that for a long time, no cameras, no court, no declarations. Just the bond the galaxy had tried and failed to sever, and for the first time in years, Varel's heartbeat resumed its original rhythm, twin-born, whole, returning to Veridai was like walking into a frozen memory that had been waiting to thaw. The capital shimmered beneath its twin moons, unaware that within its sky approached a reunion that would shake the council to its core. The Ark's descent was silent but watched. Every sensor picked up its ancient drive signature, every broadcast speculated wildly. And when Queen Varel walked down the gangplank in full regalia, none questioned her right to land, but it was who came behind her that made time stall. Saria followed at her side, not in royal armor, not in the silks of command, but in simple, gray tunic and travel-worn boots. Her scar was visible, jagged along her jaw. Her eyes burned brighter than ever. Gasps rippled through the gathered court, through the soldiers who had once carried her crest into war. Faces paled, knees buckled. Ministers who had spoken her name only in memorials now stood stunned before. "Living fire, she lives," one chancellor breathed, voice trembling. "She returns," Varel said, lifting her voice so all could hear. "Not by miracle, but by endurance." The High Minister of Intelligence collapsed to his knees. "We burned her name into the stone wall of the dead." Saria stepped forward then. "Unburn it." The chamber fell silent. The council, shaken by the revelation, immediately descended into protocol scans, verification, ancestral rite recitation, royal blood confirmation, everything. It all matched. There could be no denying it. But tradition had never moved as quickly as grief. One elder stood. "This changes succession doctrine, legacy." The structure of Varel cut him off. "She is my sister before she is your question. She is heir before she is your debate." But Saria raised her voice not as a request, but as thunder. "You buried me. I understand that. But you buried me without ever finding my body, without ever finding my truth. I should ask you why." No one answered. Then she looked around the chamber, calm and steady. "I don't want a crown. I don't need a throne. I want to walk the halls where I once bled and show the stars I did not vanish." And then she turned to Elias, who had stood near the door, silent as always. Varel noticed the moment, the way Saria's eyes softened. "Will you stay?" she asked him. He blinked. "Among royalty?" "You're not among royalty," she said. "You're among people who bled the same as you just bled in silence." Varel watched him then, and for the first time in her reign, she bowed. Her head not out of command, but out of gratitude. "Whatever Saria is now," she said, "she became it because someone chose to carry a flame the rest of us had already mourned." Elias said nothing. He didn't need to. The court fell quiet, not out of fear nor obedience, but reverence. For the living heir returned from the ashes. For the soldier who refused to surrender to death. For the bond that even the galaxy could not destroy. And from that day, the corridors of Veridai would remember not only the queen and her twin, but the silence that brought them back together. The story of her return spread faster than any official declaration could control. It was not the council broadcast that carried it, nor the palace's carefully worded statements. It was the gasps of guards who swore they saw Saria walking past the royal fountains at dusk. It was the stunned whispers of diplomats who recognized the scar on her jaw as the same one etched into the murals of the War of the Ridge. The world had moved on without her. Her statue stood in the Hall of Martyrs, candles always lit beneath it. Her face adorned textbooks etched in stone, frozen in a posture of heroic sacrifice. And yet here she was alive, walking, breathing, watching the world that had buried her continue without her. The pressure built instantly. Nobles demanded clarification. Foreign dignitaries offered both congratulations and suspicions. The Galactic Senate scrambled to rechart lines of succession and inheritance. Every faction with a motive sent envoys to probe the political fallout of a living twin once thought lost, but Varel made no room for interference. She declared before the assembled court, "My sister's life was never yours to define, and it will never be yours to weaponize." And then, before the same court that had wept at Seria's supposed death, Varel walked down from her throne not in regalia, not with fanfare, and knelt before Elias Kale, a Terran soldier, a man with no noble blood, no rank in their empire. The act shocked the entire hall. Elias stood frozen as Varel rose again and pressed a ceremonial signet into his palm. "House Valen owes a debt that cannot be paid with coin, territory, or metal," she said. "You carried half my soul across a galaxy and asked for nothing in return. That is loyalty beyond nation, beyond blood." The gesture sent waves through the galaxy. Old allies trembled. Ancient enemies paused. A Terran had been honored not just as a hero, but as kin. Later, in the quiet of the royal terrace, Seria stood beside Elias and asked, "Why didn't you give me back to them? You could have taken the reward, the prestige. Instead, you ran." Elias looked out at the moonlit city. "Because what they saw as a relic, I saw as a person. You weren't Seria the heir to them, you were someone crying in your sleep. That's who I stayed for." And for the first time since she could remember, Seria wept not out of grief, but gratitude. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, not romance, not obligation, but a sacred bond born in fire and exile. A promise that neither of them would ever be forgotten again. Morning broke over Veridai like a resurrection. The twin suns bled gold across the marble towers, and bells rang across every sector, not for a coronation, not for war, but for return. The queen and her sister walked side by side through the palace gates, the same gates they had once run through as children, beneath the watchful eyes of guards now long buried. The guards stood to attention again, but this time not out of duty but reverence. Seria did not take a crown. She refused the reinstallation ceremony. She turned down the throne room, the jeweled blade of office, the ancestral seat. Instead, she knelt at the gravesite where Varel had once mourned her, and together they lifted the stone not to destroy it, but to transform it. In place of the unfinished flame, they carved a twin blaze to halves curling toward each other, unbroken. Beneath it they inscribed not a name, but a sentence in their native tongue: "She was never truly gone." And though the galaxy watched, recording, speculating, envying, they didn't understand what they were witnessing. This was not a political event, not a historical correction. This was the return of breath to lungs that had once been silenced. This was what it meant to choose love over legacy. Varel stood before her people and said, "Let the scrolls record that my sister lived not in memory but in exile. Let it be known that she was failed by all of us and found only by one who saw her not as a symbol, but as human." The people cheered. Some wept, some still doubted, but it didn't matter. Seria had returned. Varel had her heart again. And somewhere, beyond the reach of any crown or council, a Terran soldier stood among royalty and was greeted as brother. The galaxy would never be the same, not because of war, not because of conquest, but because one man refused to let a flame die.